Okay, so we can restart, and we can do whatever you guys want to talk about. So you're totally in charge. What should we look at? What do you want to look at first?
I'm interested in the whole Melchizedek thing.
Me too. The order.
Yeah. Good choice.
It sounded like exciting.
So Melchizedek, the term Melchizedek, only appears in the Bible. What is that? 4, 5, 6, 10 times?
That once in Psalms? What's that Psalm?
Right, so it's in Psalm 110:4, which the writer of Hebrews actually quotes. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are priests forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. The name only appears one time in the Hebrew Bible, and it's right here. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought bread and wine. He was a priest to God Most High. So that's the only mention of the name. It mentions that Abraham gave a tithe of all the money that he had got when he rescued Lot and the survivors from Sodom and Gomorrah. He gives that to Melchizedek, but this is the only place that it appears. So when you come to a story in the Old Testament, what's true of every single name in the Hebrew Old Testament and in the Greek New Testament? What's true of every single name? They mean something. So as intelligent readers, what should we do?
Ask what Melchizedek means.
So can you find on your phone or somewhere what Melchizedek might mean? Like what his name means? This you can do when you're in any story, and sometimes it's those details that will spring the story. You'll realize that there's something going on with these names, like when Abraham camps between Bethel and Ai. Ai means destruction. Bethel means the house of God. He's living between the house of God and destruction. Oh, I get that. There's some kind of spiritual symbolism there, but you have to ask what the name means to get that, because sometimes they won't tell us. So what does Melchizedek mean?
My king is righteousness.
Right. So this word in...
I'm sorry, we didn't hear you. What? My king is righteousness? Yeah. Okay.
So this word in Hebrew, malki, melech is the word king. And so anytime you add the E on the end of it, it just makes it my, whatever it is. So the melki part is my king, the person who's king over me, is righteousness. My king is righteousness. So that's what his name means. And it tells us that he's king of Salem. Peace. And did you pick up that the writer of Hebrews is doing what we did, which is interpreted first, king of righteousness, king of peace. All he's doing is looking at the meaning of words. So he's doing exactly what we did as intelligent readers. Now, if Salem means peace, is there any, like if we were being detectives with this passage, is there anything else we could do that might help us figure out who this guy is? And I'm probably asking this question in a stupid way, but we could ask, where is Salem? So how could we do that?
Figure out where Abraham was coming from.
Right? So he's coming from Damascus. He's headed back toward Hebron. So we could get a map. Can you get a map and, just what's between Damascus is where he rescued Lot. Maybe I can pull up a map here. So, where is Damascus on this map?
Northwest.
Northwest. So,
Try it, Kenny. I don't know.
tell me when I'm in the right area. Higher?
No, I think it's
Not that high.
I think below.
Look, because the Red Sea is down there. So,
Yeah.
move up from the
Syria?
Red Sea. It's in Syria. Damascus is Syria.
Right. Yeah, it's probably somewhere here. So Abraham is living in Hebron, which is right here, and he went there to rescue Lot. So it's some city between these two places. So we did well. The other thing we could do is actually look up where the word appears, where the word Salem appears. Look it up in a concordance. See if that would help us. This is probably the wrong way to do that. It is the wrong way to do it. Let's do it this way. We'll search the ESV. We'll search for Salem. And it only appears two places in the Bible. So we have a choice. We can ignore the place it appears, or the other choice would be we can, let's look at it. Right? Yeah, that sounds great. What does that verse tell us about Salem? Right. Salem and Jerusalem are the same place. So help me. Hasn't solved everything, but what do we know right now about this mysterious?
Melchizedek was in the land that would become Jerusalem.
Right. Whatever Jerusalem turned into, what it originally was this place where this guy is king. We know his name means my king is righteousness. We know that he's king over what would be Jerusalem. And we know that he's priest of the Most High God.
The first priest.
He's the very first priest. Help me with that.
Before the Mosaic Law.
Before the Mosaic Law, he was a priest king in Jerusalem. He was a priest king before the Mosaic Law existed.
And like great, if I counted it right, it's either great or great grandson of Noah. Like that's how far back it goes.
I've seen that in the Jewish literature. I never knew where that came from, but it is in the Jewish literature that he's related.
Anyway, it goes back to Noah.
Some people make this person Enoch. But the bottom line is we don't know. We don't know anything other than that one verse.
And the writer of Hebrews seems to say, without genealogy.
Yeah, he just appears out of nowhere. Everybody else in this story, he lived such and such, and he died. He lived such and such, and he died. He lived such and such, and he died.
And the order of sounds almost like a fraternity, like secret society.
Yeah, boom, 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 boom. I mean, all the way to Joseph, all those people. This guy just pops in and then he disappears. The writer of Hebrews says he's made like the Son of God. So some church fathers think it actually is Jesus. That Jesus appeared. The made like seems to argue against that to me. It's saying that the writer is meaning to present this person in a way that points forward. Now, what can you tell me about kings and priests? Do any of the
Usually not the same.
They're not the same.
right, two separate offices? And what about somebody who tries to be a king priest?
It goes poorly. Saul.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it's Uzziah went in and he's struck with like leprosy, and they have to get him out before he dies, and he has leprosy the rest of his life, and all he did was dress up like a priest and go into the temple. So the idea of a king priest is very odd. If you go further back than Melchizedek, there is a person who's prophet, priest, and king, and that would be Adam in Eden. He's a spokesperson for God. He's telling his wife what God said. He's to rule over Eden, and he's priest of this heavenly temple. We talked about last week how the new Adam, Jesus, is the new prophet, priest, and king. So what you have is Melchizedek is kind of this one step down. He's prophet and priest, or priest and king. And so in that way he looks forward. Now, that's what we know from Genesis 14. He blesses Abraham. Abraham gives a tithe to him. Everything else we know in the Old Testament is from Psalm 110. And Psalm 110 is the most quoted passage in the New Testament. We're told that David wrote it, that it's a melody, and that it's the oracle of Yahweh. Have we talked in this class before that this word is called a tetragrammaton? And whenever you see this word, that what the all caps are telling you is that in the Hebrew, it's that word, the tetragrammaton, Yahweh, people say YHWH. So a Jewish person will never say this word out loud. And in fact, in the Hebrew text, all these little dots, the dots are written in such a way that it says, don't say this out loud, say another word out loud. And so instead of saying Yahweh, you're supposed to say Adonai. So when you come, those little dots say, don't say this, say the other word. And Adonai literally means my lords, plural. So when you say the Shema, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, you're saying, hear, O Israel, my lords, Adonai, Eloheinu, our gods, plural, Adonai, my lords, is one. The only singular word in the spoken Shema is the word one. So you have this weird thing in the text. When you come to the word Adonai, are you supposed to understand it as this, or are you supposed to understand it as a human being? Sarah calls Abraham Adonai, which seems pretty weird to me, but she does. She calls him this over-the-top term of respect. When you come to Psalm 110:1, and Jesus is the one who pointed out that, it says, if you were reading it in a synagogue, you would say, "Thus says Adonai to my Adoni." Can you hear how close those words are? It's like, my Lord's to my Lord singular. And so everybody's going to ask the question, what question are they going to ask? Yahweh said to, and David's the one speaking, Yahweh said to the guy who's my boss, "Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet." And so the question everybody's going to ask is, who's David's boss? What's the obvious answer going to be? Or what's an easy answer? It's Solomon. I mean, Jesus thought that people who said, okay, but Jesus said if it's Solomon, Solomon is David's son. Why would David call his own son my boss? And so you think about that and you say, okay, he wouldn't call. And so Jesus asked, well, who is David's boss? And you go, I don't know. And Jesus is going to tell us, well, keep reading. And this is actually going to help us with something from last week. The Lord sends forth from Zion your mighty scepter, rule in the midst of your enemies. So whoever this boss character is, he sits down at God's right hand, and God tells his scepter to go rule in the midst of the enemies. Is that weird to you? Like, okay, I don't get that.
Seems like you would conquer the enemies and then rule instead of ruling in the midst of enemies.
Weird that he's telling his scepter to rule.
Rule. So if we were Jews and reading this in Hebrew, bells would be going off in our head. And the reason they don't for us in English is because there's one thing that a Jewish person has an advantage over when they read this text that we don't have when we read it. And it has to do with this word, scepter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the thing, just look up every place that word appears and just tell me about it. So I push the button and it appears all those places. Now we don't want to do this in Hebrew, we want to do it in English. Okay, where does the word scepter appear in that verse? Staff. What about here? What about here? Skip that one. That one's hard to... let me get some easy ones first to see. Where does the word scepter appear? Where does it... You saw me look it up, so it's the word is in every single one of these verses. Do you see it's also the word tribe? So your staff and your scepter and your tribe are all the same word in Hebrew. Okay, help me with something. How would a Jewish person read verse 2? the Lord sends forth from Zion your mighty tribe. And then this is where biblical theological bells are going to go off. Radah, in the midst of your enemies. Remember the first command in the Bible is a fivefold command given to the man and his wife. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it. Radah. Same exact word. Do you see that this is the fulfillment? This is the first passage where someone's told to Radah since that failure in Genesis. And who's going to be the one Radahing? It's the tribe of whoever this is sitting on the throne. Do you see that?
It reminded me how we got here. We're talking about, is this connected to Melchizedek, or is this not connected to the fact that Psalm 110 is quoted in Hebrews?
Well, let's read the next verse. Your people will offer themselves freely on the day of your power. So he's talking to the guy sitting there, and he's saying your people. And so we see the whole tribe thing, it becomes your people. And now it's a people, a priest. This whole tribe thing is a whole tribe of priests. In the vestments of holiness, can you hear the whole priestly language there? From the womb of the dawn, like the blackness of dawn, gives forth to all these people who are priests. The dew of your youth will be yours. Don't know what that means? Let's keep reading. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. Who's the you there? It's singular. You singular. You are a Cohen. You know how Jewish people are, a lot of people are called Cohen? Cohen means priest. And that's the word. You are a priest forever and ever. Just like Melchizedek. My king is righteousness. Help me with that. So, in Jesus' day, people were saying, it's Solomon. Is Solomon Melchizedek? No, I mean, Solomon's got that whole thing going with 1,000 different women. You know, God said don't multiply wives, and I guess it was a day with the Lord is 1,000 years. I guess that was his hermeneutic, because so as long as I keep it under 1,000, you know, it's like 400 wives, 600 mistresses. It's like, dude, you got a problem. They got groups for that. Go get fixed. You know, and he's building these temples to Moloch and all this, and he's worshiping God, and he's sneaking off, and he's worshiping God. Is Solomon the king of righteousness? No. Well, who is it?
Jesus.
It's Jesus. It has to be Jesus. And when he says you're a priest forever, what stops a person from being a priest?
Death.
Death.
Oh, excited.
Death stops a person. So what does this imply? If you're a priest forever, it implies that this person will never die. If we read the rest of the psalm, it talks about this grand victory where this king leads this tribe and they conquer the whole world. So what do you think why did early Christians find that passage so persuasive, so interesting? They're going to say, well, look, Melchizedek was a priest before Aaron. So Aaron can't be the ultimate priest. And we've got a king who'll never die. He died once, he's never going to die again. He's the priest forever. He's the true king of heavenly Jerusalem. He's the king of righteousness. My king is righteousness. My king is peace, which is exactly what the Genesis says. So at the end of the day, I don't know. I don't know what we can do beyond that. He appears two places. He's a mysterious figure. It doesn't seem to me to be physical Jesus, but it's weird enough that it's pointing to something else. I know in the Dead Sea Scrolls there's a document called 11Q Melchizedek, and in that document makes Melchizedek the angel of the Lord, like God in his eminence, and he's fighting a king called Melchirasha, which means my king is wickedness. But the problem with 11Q Melchizedek is it's just one sheet of paper, and it has holes all in it. So we know that somebody was writing about it, but 26 different fragments and holes, and so I know that whoever the writer was thought Melchizedek was really significant, but beyond that, I don't know.
So, okay. So if the priests come from Aaron's line, right?
The line of Levi, so Moses.
Levi's, right, Moses. Okay, so this Melchizedek, would the order of Melchizedek, would that be like an alternate branch of priests?
We don't even know if they're from the same family as Abraham. We don't know if they're related at all, if he's related at all.
Okay. Fair enough.
So it goes Abraham, Isaac, Jacob has the 12, and Levi is one, and Judah is the other. And so Levi is where all the priests comes from, and Judah is where all the kings come from. And you know as much about it now as anybody.
But he's both.
But he's both.
He's both. He's got it all going on.
And Jesus is all three, prophet, priest, and king. In the Old Testament, you're looking for a prophet, priest, and king. And Jesus is the perfect fulfillment of all that. Okay, so we have 25 minutes. What do you want to look at? You can look at anything you want to look at.
Why let's talk about angels? I mean, it just goes on. This whole Jesus is superior to the angels. He starts Hebrews off with a ton of angels.
Yeah.
And also, I felt like even reading Ephesians, there's a lot more talk about angels than
Principality and powers and heavenly rulers and spiritual places. What's driving it is that Jesus has become superior to the angels. So in the Psalms it talks about the Son of Man, you have made him a little lower than the angels.
So this is the elevation.
And this is the elevation superior. I wonder if in the Old Testament you have this really weird feature with angels, and particularly the angel of the Lord. So the angel of the Lord comes to the burning bush. And you say, okay, I got that. It's the angel of the Lord. But then it starts talking about that figure as if that figure is actually God. And it happens with Hagar. It's the angel, but she says, I've seen God. It happens with Samuel. It happens with Samson's parents. in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, Yahweh appears with two angels to Abraham, and you say, okay, I got that. It's Yahweh and two angels. The problem is all three of them talk at the same time. All three of them say, you're our servant. And you think, that's really weird, angels talking while God's talking. Then they leave at the end of 18, and it says Yahweh is there and the two angels go to Sodom and Gomorrah. And you say, okay, it's Yahweh and two angels. And so Yahweh goes to heaven. The problem is in 19 it starts calling one of those angels Yahweh. And in the end of 19 it says, so Yahweh rained down fire from Yahweh in heaven. It's like, wait, I thought Yahweh is like one. And if we could go to Jewish rabbis, and if you're interested in this, there's actually a book written by a Jewish man called Two Powers in Heaven. And the author is Alan Siegel. He's a Jew. He's not a Christian, but he gathers all this evidence about until 400 AD, Jewish people would say, oh, there's no problem in 19. That's the little Yahweh. So you've got a big Yahweh in heaven, and you've got this little Yahweh. And they actually gave the little Yahweh a name. They called him Metatron. And the little Yahweh is all through Jewish literature. It's in Metatron's in First Enoch. Metatron's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So you've got Jewish people, and even Philo, rough contemporary of Jesus, will talk about the Logos being kind of the immanent function. And the Targums will talk about the word of the Lord as being kind of this God in his immanence. Well, if you were a Christian and a Jewish person says, oh, that's the little Yahweh, what would you do with that?
Oh, yeah, Jesus.
Let me tell you, that's who Jesus is. Jesus is God in his immanence on earth. And finally, in 400 AD, Jewish people said, look, we're getting creamed with this little Yahweh argument. Anybody says the word little Yahweh from now on, you're out. And so they cut it off, and that ceased to be an explanation. But up until that time, they're saying, yeah, in the text, you've got angelic figures who look like God, who talk like God, who act like God, who are called God.
So what do they say now? Or after that, what was their correction?
They're saying it's someone who's representing God, but he's not God. Could it be that the recipients of the book of Hebrews had begun to play with the angel of the Lord and had begun to interpret it in a non-divine way? And so the writer is saying, look, Jesus is better. Angels are this.
It's a gentle correction.
It's a gentle correction. What else do you want to look at?
I'd like to hear your thoughts on the author.
So, everything that we know about the author, we know that he's writing before the temple was destroyed, because he talks about the priests offering sacrifices. So that ended in 70 AD. So after that, he couldn't have said that, at least in my opinion. Some people doubt that. Everything we know about the author comes from these verses. Verse 18. Pray for us that shows that whoever wrote this book knew the people he was writing to, and they knew him. He couldn't say, if it were like totally anonymous, like we don't know who this person is, he can't say, pray for us. It's like, who are you? I have no idea who you are. Whoever it was chose not to write his name, but he said, you pray for me. You know who I am, you pray for me. I urge you, so it's one person who's writing, the more earnestly that I may be restored to you sooner. So whoever he's writing to was somebody who is in a group, who has been separated and wants to be back with that group. I appeal to you, brothers, with my word of exhortation, for I have written to you briefly. You should know that our brother Timothy has been released. So this is the Timothy who was a companion with Paul. And we never know of Timothy being in prison when Paul wrote, but the writer here is saying Timothy was in prison, but now he's released, whom I shall see you if he comes soon. So he's saying the two of us are going to see you. So who is it? Well, if you ask me personally, the most obvious answer to me would be Paul. Paul knew Timothy. Paul knew churches. The problem is that from very early times, Origen and other people point out that the grammar of Hebrews is different from Paul's 13 letters. In Greek, you can read Paul's 13 letters, and they're easy Greek. There aren't complicated sentences. When you read Hebrews, Hebrews is hard Greek. It's like the grammar is challenging. Most people, after a few years, can just breeze through anything Paul wrote. When you come to Hebrews, it's like, wow, I'm really having to work to understand this. And so Origen said that shows that Paul couldn't have written it. Maybe I would grant that. I don't know. I mean, Paul admits that he uses a secretary. We know Tertius was his secretary in Romans. So I'm not as sure as Origen is that the grammar would exclude. I'm granting the point that it's a different style when you read it. I just don't know if it will support. The vast majority of people go with Origen and say there's no way that that grammar can be the same writer. Maybe they're right.
Do you not think that tone matters at all either? Because the tone of Hebrews seems to be different from any other book that I read.
It does. People talk in similar phrases, and so that's an argument. The same with the grammar, that it just seems different. John Owen, who was this fantastic biblical languages person, he was totally convinced that Paul wrote it. He even would say, I don't see how anybody could see anything other than Paul. I'm somewhere in the middle. I think Paul could have written it. There are ancient Greek speakers who think Paul wrote it, but I recognize that every time I read it, the grammar is hard grammar, and I don't know what to do that if Paul did write it. So,
But if he was in, I'm just kidding. But if he was in prison And he had a secretary that was highly educated in Greek, who was transcribing for him in the correct tenses.
Yeah.
Like Luke.
I mean,
it's the
that-
Hebrews
yeah.
Hebrews is the Luke, right? So
And that would be the argument. I mean, people have put every person's name. If I couldn't say Paul wrote it, I would go with Luke, because when you read Luke and you read Hebrews, there is this polished nature. But at the end of the day, we just don't know. I mean, all we have is just these two sentences. The person was known to the group and was connected with Timothy. And you have to ask, why in the world didn't they put their name? I mean, what was it about their name? Particularly if he's writing to Jewish Christians who Paul caused a riot in Jerusalem. I mean, could that be a reason not to look, don't stir things up? You need to hear this, but I'm not going to put my name on it. But at the end of the day, I don't know.
but you would assume that too. So he's already in prison. Timothy's captured and soon to be released.
And I love the fact that it's anonymous.
But if they're in hiding and persecuted, that would make sense.
Yeah, it would make sense to me. You wouldn't want to put your name on it.
Because it could be traced back to you.
But isn't it beautiful in Christian circles when you do something and you don't care who gets the credit for it? Isn't there something Jesus-like about that? That you just do something and this is, whether my name's on it or not, I don't care. I love that about Hebrews. It doesn't.
Obviously, the people who received it knew who he was.
Knew.
So either he's, like, I guess, sent it along with somebody and said, hey, by the way, tell him I did this. Or tell him I'm right. You know, like.
But not actually putting his name.
Yeah. Or is it maybe I don't know how it works. Is it that we just don't have a copy that has a name on it? Is it maybe that, like, when they copied it, they didn't transcribe the name?
Yeah, some of the manuscripts do have little notes, but those notes differ, and those weren't put by the person who wrote it.
Yeah.
So all we have is kind of this anonymous thing known to the receivers and connected with Timothy, but other than that, we don't know.
The Keener commentary that we were using with Sam talks about the possibility of it being Silas or Apollos for different reasons. Like I think Silas because of the location, and then Apollos.
He was connected with Timothy. They had traveled together. And then Apollos because
of Alexandrian rhetoric and philosophy training, which shows up in this.
Would show why it's so difficult. You do have that whole secretary thing, and next time we're together, we're going to read 1st and 2nd Peter, and in Greek, those are like so different. But one of them has Silas as the writer, and the other one is Peter. And so you wonder if there's kind of like this Spanglish thing going on where you've got somebody who speaks really well and then Peter doing it on his own, and you get this radically different. And even your own writing, if you have the occasion to do writing over a lifetime, I look at stuff that I wrote 30 years ago, and it's different from, this style is different from what it is now. So.
He also said that it's less common, but like people speculated that Priscilla could have written.
Yeah, even
which is really great to know.
Yeah, it's funny. There's a manuscript called Manuscript D, and it's a great manuscript, but whoever copied it couldn't stand the fact that Priscilla's name was first and changed every single one of them to Aquila and Priscilla because he just couldn't stand. I mean, glad he copied the manuscript, but hey, you got a problem. You know?
Can you speak to Hebrews 11:39 and 40, very end of it? And all these, though committed through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God has provided something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect.
Yeah, so what that's getting at is if you go read the Abraham story, God's saying, I'm going to give you the land, I'm going to give you the land, I'm going to give you the land. Says it to Isaac, says it to Jacob. None of them get it in it, ever. They get little bitty pieces of it. The one time God puts Abraham to sleep, he actually says, you're not going to get the land, you're going to die. 400 years later, then this is going to happen. And you read that story and you say, why in the world is God saying you're going to get the land, and then in this vision saying you're not going to get it and you're going to die? Well, the writer of Hebrews is saying, because God wasn't talking about that land, he was talking about the restoration of the Garden of Eden. And so what he's saying here is they had these promises, but they didn't get what it was really about until Jesus came. And God, the ultimate story of the Bible is God making one unified people of all tribes, tongues, and that's the first promise that God makes to Abraham. Through you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And so until the Jesus event happens, that can't be fulfilled. God's fulfilling it to Abraham because Abraham's living in the presence of God forever. So the writer of Hebrews is saying that promise was never intended to be a temporal land-only promise. It was meant to be restoration of the Garden of Eden, which is exactly what Abraham got and what we get.
So that's why they're so upset it's not a militaristic Messiah who still hasn't shown up yet.
Right, because the promise was never made. I mean, there are places in Israel today where the entire country is 12 miles wide. My house in Saudi to Sail Creek, 12 miles. The entire country is that wide. God was never promising just that little bitty place. He was promising from the river of Eden to the ends of the earth. And that's what he's giving. Same thing, I'll make your offspring like the stars which no one can count. Do you know that's a scientific blunder? All kinds of people count the stars. You go out and count 1,000. Everybody who's ever done it, you get, it's 960 to like 1080, you can see, and all kinds of people have come up with that number. It wasn't until the Hubble telescope that we realized that the number of stars is like the sand of the sea, trillions and trillions. And God knew that all along, and he's saying, okay, yeah, you're looking up and you can see 1,000, but trust me, there's more going on than you can see. And you wonder if the whole land promise isn't like that. You're hearing this, but I'm actually promising that.
Isn't there even a psalm that says, I'm trying to remember how it goes, that, you know, I'll establish your, I think you might have alluded to it a moment ago, I'll establish your land from the river to
The ends of the earth, yeah. And that's what he's doing. The river, the little Gihon, you know, that comes out in Jerusalem and in Ezekiel, but it's going to make fertile the whole earth, which is exactly what John says. So in the 5 minutes we have left, that whole thing quoting Deuteronomy, Yes, it's not in the Masoretic text. It is in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the sentence that Hebrews quotes is the last sentence out of Moses' mouth. If the last sentence out of Moses' mouth was Moses on the authority of God telling the angels to worship a second figure, whose theology would that help? Christians. And if you're copying that text and you're getting creamed over and over and over by that, and you know when you copy it, you burn the original, what would you be very, very, very tempted to do? Change a letter here, change a letter there, who'll know? That's what happened, and it looked like the person got away with it until 1947. And the Dead Sea Scrolls have pre-Christian copies, 4Q88, I think it is. It's from K4, has Deuteronomy, and it has exactly what the writer of Hebrews says. So a lot of people will say he's quoting the Septuagint. You hear that all the time, and it's true, the Septuagint, he does agree, but the Septuagint agrees not with the Masoretic text, it agrees with the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the Masoretic text was copied in 1008 AD. It's a medieval. Dead Sea Scrolls are, 200 and 300 BC. We're talking about manuscripts 1,200 years.
So how in the world would the Septuagint then, would they have access to those?
They didn't have access to the Dead Sea Scrolls, but if they had a copy of the Hebrew text, it's reading the same reading that the Dead Sea Scrolls are reading. And so now we've got evidence, and maybe someone did it by accident. I want to be as generous as I can, but accident or on purpose, we've got enough stuff where we can see the fingerprints of what somebody tried to do and we can fix it. So that one tripped me up for a long, long time until I stumbled into the Dead Sea Scrolls and I thought, oh, somebody changed this. And we know there are 18 places, they're called the Tikkun Soparim, the correction of the scribes, where they come to a text and didn't like it and change it. So they admit that they did that 18 places. Well, who's to say they didn't do it more than 18 places? And if the very last sentence out of Moses' mouth is Yahweh telling the angels to worship a second figure, that would be massively important to Christians. And if I'm getting killed in this debate, I'm going to be very tempted to try to not have that be said by Moses. And I wonder if that is what happened. All right. So see you in 2 weeks. We'll do 1st and 2nd Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.